In a shocking turn of events, Sean "Diddy" Combs, once known for his glamorous lifestyle and chart-topping music, is now facing deeply disturbing allegations that could destroy his entire legacy.
A year ago, Sean Combs stood in Times Square and was handed a key to New York City. Today, he's been indicted and will face justice in the Southern District of New York.
The details of his infamous freak-offs have surfaced, revealing a dark world of manipulation, abuse, and exploitation. This isn't just another celebrity scandal. It's an insanely shocking story that exposes the hidden side of fame and power, and it's forcing us to question just how far someone can go before the truth comes out. Let's get straight to the video and examine the accusations.
Federal prosecutors say hip-hop mogul Sean Diddy Combs used his power and business empire to carry out a long and shocking list of crimes for years.
We need to talk about the infamous freak-offs, a term that has now become synonymous with Diddy's name. These alleged events form the heart of a federal case against the music mogul, a case that could potentially land him behind bars for up to life. What exactly were these freak-offs? Why are they so integral to the charges? And how did Diddy's empire of power and prestige turn so dark? According to the government's indictment, Combs allegedly subjected victims to unimaginable abuse. This wasn't just physical. The indictment paints a picture of a man who used emotional and verbal intimidation to force victims into participating in these grotesque events. These parties, described as elaborate sexual performances, were orchestrated to satisfy Diddy's twisted desires, often recorded without the victim's knowledge. We have to ask ourselves, how could such a powerful figure get away with this for so long? Let's take a step back and reflect on the severity of these accusations. Diddy is not just facing allegations of inappropriate behavior. This is about sex trafficking, coercion, and the abuse of women. These accusations highlight a systematic effort to manipulate and harm women, using his fame and resources as weapons. From what we know, the allegations span over a decade, going back to 2009, with a pattern of behavior that includes not only sexual exploitation, but the distribution of drugs like ketamine, GHB, and ecstasy. These drugs were allegedly used to keep the victims compliant, sometimes without their knowledge. This isn't just troubling, it's terrifying. The indictment also reveals that the so-called freak-offs were not isolated incidents. These gatherings happened regularly, sometimes lasting for days, and involved multiple sex workers. Victims were lured under false pretenses, often thinking they were entering a romantic relationship with Diddy. Instead, they found themselves trapped in a web of coercion and violence. But what's even more shocking is the alleged videotaping of these events, with footage kept by Diddy, unknown to the victims. Imagine the trauma of realizing you were recorded during one of the most vulnerable and manipulated moments of your life. As if the details weren't already damning enough, there's more. After these freak-offs, participants, including Diddy himself, reportedly received IV fluids to recover from the exhaustion and drug use. It's a detail that illustrates just how extreme these events were. This was no casual party. This was an orchestrated spectacle, where power, drugs, and manipulation were the main ingredients. The federal authorities seem to have substantial evidence to back up these claims. During the investigation, they seized over 90 cell phones, laptops, and other electronic devices, some of which contain recordings of the freak-offs. These recordings could be the smoking gun that seals Diddy's fate. Imagine the legal implications of such evidence. Videos of victims engaged in non-consensual acts, with drugs possibly used to manipulate them into submission. It's no wonder Diddy's defense team is scrambling to frame these events as consensual, but the weight of the evidence suggests otherwise. We also have to consider the broader implications. This isn't just about Sean Combs. It's about the abuse of power in the entertainment industry and how influential figures can operate above the law for years. Diddy's case might be one of the most public, but it raises the question, how many others are out there, hidden behind their wealth and fame? As we watch this case unfold, we must remain critical of the defense's narrative. They may try to paint these disturbing events as consensual, but the patterns of manipulation and coercion are hard to ignore. The victims' voices, coupled with the mountain of evidence, speak louder than any attempt to gloss over the truth. But there's still so much more to unpack about these allegations. The allegations against Sean Diddy Combs have unfolded like a horror saga that feels too surreal to believe. But here we are, diving into a narrative that, if proven true, reveals a dark, disturbing undercurrent behind the facade of fame and success. What's even more shocking is the sheer depth of evidence that has surfaced, painting a picture far more sinister than the average celebrity scandal. The government, in their recent letters, outlines events so methodically depraved that we are left questioning not only Combs' alleged actions, but the entire structure surrounding him. How did these so-called freak-offs go on for so long, unchecked, even after legal action and media exposure? The claims made in the testimonies, combined with mountains of physical evidence, seem difficult to refute. Videos, travel logs, hotel receipts, and communications all appear to align in one cohesive narrative that points towards a systemic exploitation of vulnerable individuals. Take, for instance, the hotel damages. A penthouse suite in Manhattan was reportedly destroyed after one such freak-off event, with Combs allegedly paying over $46,000 to cover the costs. What exactly transpired in that room? What could have possibly caused such extensive damage? Prosecutors claim that it was due to one of these wild sexual performance events. The fact that there are detailed receipts for such claims makes it even more plausible, drawing us into the reality of what these freak-offs might have entailed. But this is where it gets even more troubling, because this isn't just about lavish parties gone wrong. The core of the allegations rests on something far more nefarious: coercion, manipulation, and violence. The U.S. Attorney Damian Williams has laid out a case that frames these events as sex trafficking operations, facilitated by threats, violence, and the abuse of power. The testimonies from victims speak of a pattern in which they were not merely participants in these events, but prisoners coerced through fear and violence into performing extended sexual acts, often with male commercial sex workers brought across state lines. Combs didn't just allegedly run these freak-offs as a wild celebrity indulgence. The prosecution claims he used threats and physical abuse to ensure participation. The victims have testified to being beaten, dragged, and emotionally tormented into submission. In one particularly harrowing account, a victim described being kicked, thrown, and dragged by her hair in 2016 while trying to flee from a freak-off. The aftermath? Captured on video, of course, because it wasn't enough for Combs to exert his power in the moment. He allegedly kept recordings of these events as leverage, a way to ensure that the victims couldn't speak out without fearing further humiliation or exposure. It's this sickening use of power, both physical and psychological, that strikes at the core of these allegations. Combs, according to the indictment, manipulated people's fears, used their vulnerabilities against them, and forced them into acts they never consented to. When the victims tried to escape, he allegedly lashed out in violence. And in some cases, as the prosecutors argue, he even attempted to bribe hotel security to cover up these attacks, allegedly offering a stack of cash to silence witnesses. This is not just about freak-offs. This is about the systemic abuse of power and a trail of violence that left numerous victims in its wake. But what about the entourage that surrounded Combs? According to the indictment, these events were not a solo operation. The prosecution outlines a coordinated effort involving members of Combs' enterprise, his security staff, assistants, household employees, and even business associates. They weren't just passive witnesses. They allegedly helped organize and execute these events, ensuring hotel rooms were prepared with the necessary supplies, controlled substances, lubricants, extra linens, and, disturbingly, over 1,000 bottles of baby oil. They arranged travel for victims and sex workers, cleaned up the rooms afterward, and perhaps most importantly, facilitated the flow of money that kept the machine going. This was, according to the government, a well-oiled operation aimed at serving Combs' desires, regardless of the consequences for the victims involved. Now let's step back for a moment. Even if Combs' defense were to argue that these events were consensual, the prosecution has made it abundantly clear that the issue is not simply about wild parties or sex. This is about coercion, manipulation, and ultimately, control. It's about using force, threats, and the promise of career advancement to pressure people into situations they never wanted to be in. This isn't a tabloid scandal. It's a potential criminal enterprise, with Combs at the helm, allegedly using every resource at his disposal to ensure these events continued, even when the walls started closing in. And the evidence doesn't stop there. In March 2024, during searches of Combs' properties in Miami and Los Angeles, law enforcement reportedly seized narcotics, thousands of bottles of lubricant, and other items related to these freak-offs. This raises a crucial question. If these events were consensual, why would such an excessive amount of these supplies be necessary? And why would they be kept hidden, ready for use at a moment's notice. What's even more damning is that, according to prosecutors, these events didn't stop even when Combs knew he was under investigation. The government alleges that as late as January 2024, after lawsuits had been filed and the media had caught wind of the story, Combs continued to engage in freak-offs, transporting individuals across state lines, using narcotics, and coercing witnesses. This blatant disregard for the law, if proven, speaks to a level of arrogance and entitlement that is deeply troubling. The allegations are staggering, and the sheer scale of this case makes it one of the most shocking celebrity scandals in recent memory. With over 50 witnesses and victims already interviewed, and more expected to come forward, the investigation is far from over. Each new revelation only adds to the gravity of the charges, and the stakes for Combs could not be higher. Will more former employees flip? Will more victims find the courage to speak out? One thing is clear: the walls are closing in, and the evidence is mounting. In the end, this isn't just about the freak-offs. It's about the alleged exploitation of power, the abuse of trust, and the trauma inflicted on countless individuals who became pawns in a much larger game. As more details emerge, we'll continue to follow the developments. But for now, it's hard to imagine how anyone could justify these actions. Combs' defense may argue consent, but the weight of the evidence suggests something far darker. This is a story that's only beginning to unfold, and unfortunately, it's one that we might be hearing about for a long time to come. As shocking as these revelations are, they remind us of the dark side of fame and power. The allegations surrounding P. Diddy could reshape how we view those at the top of the entertainment industry. As this story progresses, we'll keep you updated. If you want to see more stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell.